Hello, hello. Welcome to the Joyosity podcast. I'm so glad that you're with us today. Whether you are a seasoned leader or just starting out, the Joyosity community is for you. So if you're new to Joyosity, we base our work on three bedrock beliefs. One, that true leadership requires more than just surface level strategies. It's a profound connection to everything that makes us human. Number two, using genuine curiosity, we can create positive culture with all those complex people because all those complex people are all that we have to work with. And number three, that joy is the heartbeat of a healthy leader and a healthy organization. So we're putting joy and play right in the center of all of our work. And every week on the podcast, we bring you dynamic conversations with experts and leaders sharing more than a couple tips and tricks to help you lead. We're really helping you build a movement, and we're doing it with you based on hard-won wisdom, real-life experiences, and leading research. So I'm Jen Whitmer, international speaker, leadership consultant, and I like to say all-around joy bringer. And I am guiding us along the way. And together, we are going to move from ideas to action and embracing all of the challenges that come with leading in this very fast, ever-changing world. So I want you to be ready with your multiple beverages, with your speaker, with your notes, because there's going to be times where you're going to say, I need this right now, and stuff you want to write down. And it's going to transform you as a person and you as a leader. So we are ready to go. And this episode is our monthly In Case You Missed It episode. And so I get to introduce my chief gen officer, my chief of staff, who runs her business called Sunshine Lane, which is an agency for creatives. So we as creative entrepreneurs have more time to do the things that we're really good at. And she helps with all the things that I'm not really good at. And she runs a fantastic team of people. So welcome, Shelby Merriweather.
Hello. I'm so happy to be on this side of the screen with you. It's kind of fun.
I know, it is super fun. So Shelby is also my podcast producer. She produces live streams for lots of amazing people, mostly on YouTube and LinkedIn. And we thought, because we work together so closely, that, and in case you missed an episode with us talking about how we used the concepts of the month, would be really helpful to you. So if you didn't get to listen to the first three episodes, first of all, I talked about what we need, that without joy, that is what is killing us at work. And then Kindra Hall, we did 2 episodes with her around why stories are a part of being a good leader and bringing joy into the workplace. And so for me, all I could think about this month and the storytelling was dropping my third of 4 kiddos at college. So we are at this literal beginning and ending of stories. And one of the things that Kindra talked about is knowing where you are in the story is really helpful. And so last week, Kindra was talking about pulling from your old stories and knowing how you in that situation got through. So mining your old stories. And as a parent of teenagers, fellow Gen Xers and millennials out there who have teenagers, you will know that sometimes when you start to tell a story, they're like, okay, yeah, mom. And so I started pulling from stories of hers rather than mine to help her. And so when we were leaving her in her room, she's got, she and her roommate got everything lofted. There are lights everywhere. We've taken all the pictures, and so now it's time for like the real goodbye. And we're leaving her 4.5 hours away from home. She's so ready. Like, I know she's going to be great, but she's not so sure. And so she worked at Starbucks this summer. And her first day at the bar, which is when you make the drinks, she kind of lost her mind. And like, she called us in tears, like, I can't do this. This is terrible. I don't know. Like, it wasn't the best setup. It was really hard. Like, all of those things were really true. And then literally 9 days later, she had like her third time on the bar. And I came in and she was like flipping those things and pulling tags and everything was fine and normal. And so while we're standing, by her desk in loft, I was like, remember your first day at the bar? It was really hard. And then not very long later, you were totally ready and just so smooth at it. And that's what it's going to feel like here. Just reminding her of her story and how she had the not feeling confident at all, like
Mhm.
really falling apart at first, but then she's done that. And so, as I like to sing, I've done it before, I can do it again. She's like, okay, mom.
I
But
love it. I don't know
yeah.
if you remember, when we were going through coaching, you and I,
Mm,
my little buddy was like my first kid, I think he was like 9 months old, so he was like learning how to crawl, walk type of situation, and
mm,
you gave me the
oh.
advice of do not steal their struggle.
Oh, yes.
And that has been, like, throughout my entire, like, 4 years of parenting. It has been on my, like, brain over and over again of,
Mm,
like, we don't steal their struggle because it's almost like you're stealing their story. Because
yeah,
every good story has the struggle, so don't take
yes.
that part. I don't know. I just thought
Yeah.
of that as you're talking about the whole bar situation because yeah, that's
Yeah,
kind of
I mean, that's a situation I can't fix for her.
right.
I literally cannot take the struggle from her when she's at work.
Yeah,
And when you have a team member, there are times where you literally can't take their struggle either. So
yes.
what do you do? How do you use a story to help lead and guide? And I never thought about it as stealing their story though.
Yeah.
That's really
That just
interesting.
came to me as you were talking about
Yeah.
that. And that's interesting you bring, like, the teammate aspect into it too, because that has been a really fun part of my as I've grown,
Mhm.
is watching people struggle with things that I struggled with when I'm
Mm,
handing off tasks. So, like, I'm handing off things that I, Shelby, have done for 4 years. It's like at the bar where I'm pulling the tabs and I'm
mm,
good. I know how to update this on that website, blah, blah, blah.
mhm.
And when I'm passing it off to the teammate, it's almost like I'm seeing, like, "Oh, I remember that." Like, I was totally confused by that. Like, "Oh, I remember when I messed that up. Like, it's okay. It's not a big deal. Like, let's here's what I did, here's how I handled that mistake." So that I love that little nugget of leadership advice too, of like
Mhm.
kind of thinking of it that way.
Yeah, and we had another kind of thing even just this month because if you've been following along, like you pay attention to us really deeply, we have changed a lot. And what you don't know is we've changed a lot in the back end of our business. So for us to change how you receive the podcast, it changed every process that we have to work together. And it meant new email formats, it meant a new workflow. And I mean, three-quarters of it I don't even know because Shelby and her team have worked out. Some of it I do obviously know, but we even had one of those. I was like, I don't know how to do that. But whenever I run into that, here's what I have tried. Like go to the help doc or even just Google sometimes helps, but it's fine that you don't know. Here's how I would go find the answer
Yeah.
and kind of it took a moment for me because I knew that I could probably figure it out. I don't know if I could figure it out faster or not, but I had to think, wait, is this my question? Is it mine to do? It would it be better for me to solve this or actually say, here's the directions to go solve this for yourself, which sometimes can feel as a leader unkind, but actually it's not unkind. It she now knows better how to solve that problem in active campaign than I do. And that's not a skill that
Right.
I totally need to develop right now. But that's what she's becoming so much more adept at. And yeah, it's a funny tension sometimes when you're telling the story of yes, I have experienced that feeling before. Here's how I solved it. Go do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
I
and I think
release you to thrive.
the college thing is super a great analogy for it really of like, I don't know, like that's just so exciting that you're just like, oh, that gives me like as a mom of a 4-year-old, like the idea of sending my children to college. Oh,
Yes, they
yeah.
have time to get ready, I
Yeah.
promise.
Okay.
Just like, what so if you're new to me, I have 4 kids. They're, 2 of them are in their 20s, 1 is a freshman in high school, and 1 is a freshman in college. And, so we had 4 kids in 6 years, and I got the question all the time, "How did you do it?" And one of the things I always said is, "Well, I didn't get all 4 at once. I didn't get all of them at the same time." And it's like that in leadership too. Typically, you're not suddenly given a team of 10 people. Usually you start out with managing a project and then you manage a direct report or a small team or a client. You do get to work into it. So I
Yeah.
think sometimes we discount ourselves because we tell ourselves the story, I can't do that because we look at the end of someone else's story
100.
not the beginning and the middle, and realizing that, oh, I'm actually at the beginning of the story because I'm managing this project. I'm not managing the company yet. And that's okay. That's
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah. And thank goodness we don't go from this to that, right?
Oh
Like,
my
thank goodness
gosh.
it's not all of a sudden like managing a huge company. Like
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
story, yeah. And it
The story.
builds your skills as you go. That's a really good
Mhm.
reminder.
Yes. Oh, Siri decided she wanted to participate. We don't need you. I got a new mini Apple HomePod and they wanted to participate. So, when we're talking about joy at work, and the stories, you were telling me some things that you have been thinking about from what we talked about with Kindra and other things. What came up for you this month as you were applying what we've talked about?
Yes, I've actually loved so just for a fun kind of like behind the scenes, we've come up with different ways to structure content, right? And this
Mhm,
month has been all about storytelling. And so as I've gone into my Gen work time, I'm storytelling is just like top of mind all month long. And it's been really fun for me because I have found so many little things are popping up about telling stories and how we're telling our stories. And I'm not gonna lie, when we started with this idea, I was like, yeah, storytelling is great. It's wonderful, but who has time to listen to stories? Right.
it's a common response.
Yeah, and I think Kendra spoke to that a little bit about how I think it was was it keynote speaking or something where like most people go, "Oh, storytelling, like
Yeah.
that sounds nice." Like it's almost like that like, "Oh, that's nice for you, but like I
Mhm,
don't have time for that," kind of thing. And as I've thought about it all month, I'm like, "No, that is 100% what has my attention." I think
mm,
it doesn't. But when I'm scrolling on my phone or when I'm listening to something, as soon as it's a story and it's engaging, I'm there. Like I'm learning. And I've
mhm,
had several little nuggets this month where I have found myself clicking on things that I maybe wouldn't have in the past because they're talking about storytelling. And
mm.
by the end of it, I'm like, everybody needs this. Like everybody needs to know how important storytelling is. Like it has been so fun for me to see it applied in different industries and across different like social media platforms too.
Mhm. Yeah.
It's been good.
I
So
think one of the things that's so fascinating about our resistance to storytelling is because it is so biological. Like we are literally wired for it. And as I am working on my book and digging into research, I was looking at like mirror neurons and got really nerded out about how they function and work, and do they work in a remote environment. Like I've gone way down the rabbit trail of how storytelling not only activates those mirror neurons, which means, oh, I see you, like that's what it does. So it brings connection. Storytelling brings attunement. So if you think about a lot of problems at work becomes because we're misaligned, we're not seeing things the same way. Storytelling brings attunement, so it brings alignment. And then it also weakens our fight, flight, freeze, fawn skepticism. That's what storytelling like kind of shuts off that part of the brain, and why. So the mirror neurons and the attunement reduce the resistance to new ideas and new concepts. And so I'm going to have you tell the story that you told me earlier about your son to kind of demonstrate we are wired for stories. So tell us
okay.
about it.
So my son is 4 years old and he's so sweet. He's the best. But he has been doing this new thing that honestly until this month I didn't understand why he was doing it. But thanks to like this talk around stories, I'm like, "Oh, I get why he's doing it." But he will randomly if he does something that maybe he didn't want to do or maybe it's a mistake that he made, he will come to me and say, "Hey mama, will you tell me a story about when you broke your monster truck and then you got mad at your sister about it?" And it's like, buddy, that like exact situation didn't happen, but here's a story about a time that I was mean to my brother because he had a toy or something. But he's literally been asking me to tell him stories that are his exact story because he wants to know he's not alone in it. And because of this kind of like talk and research that you've been sharing with me, I'm like, oh, it's his way of learning and processing through his experiences is he wants me to share my story. It's just been super cute.
Yeah, I love that. Well, and it's like you can't escape that we're wired for stories, and it's
Yeah.
easy to see in children. And I think the myth is that we grow out of it.
Yeah.
rather than, oh, no, we're biologically wired for that. So like the grown up, quote unquote, grown up version of that is your team is together and they're like, oh my gosh, we missed the mark. Now what? And you tell the story of here's what happened on another team I had when we missed the mark. And here's what we did about it. And here's how we changed or made it better. So now what do we do? And there's so much more connection and brainstorming and creativity that comes from that connected space of empathy and human-centered leadership that everybody's talking about, but storytelling is the way we get there in
And
that way.
I made the mistake early on when he would ask me like, "Hey, will you tell me about a story when you broke your Nerf gun?" And I was like, "Did you break your Nerf gun?" And he's like, "No, no, I didn't." And I'm like, "Okay." But I feel like that's also, like, can be applied for adults where it's like, there's that shame that storytelling
Mhm.
almost takes out of because it's like,
Yeah,
"Oh, it's fine, buddy, like, toys break, it's not a big deal, and here's when that happened to me." And
yes.
but coming straight out and saying, "Did you do that?" Kind of, I think a story might be a better way to get into that.
I love it. He's like, "Oh, no, I didn't bring my Nerf gun. No. I wasn't late sending the client the bill. I didn't do that."
With a timestamp on it.
Yeah.
No, it wasn't me.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. I think one of the things that I've been thinking a lot about, because I love the theory and I can nerd way out, but I'm also just such a like, well, how? How do I do this? What does that matter? And I have been talking with a few people who are coming to the Joyosity retreat in November. And one of the big things that we do, part of one of the days, is identifying stories, not just the stories we're talking about, like that one time when that helps, but really how do you manage the rest of the stories that go through your mind, because we add story to everything. And that the big fancy word for that is metacognition, which is really just thinking about your thinking. But then how do I actually change my thinking? Like, what does that look like? And I talk about it as changing the story. Like, you get to write the story. You have to rewrite it with truth. You can't rewrite the story with fake things, because your body rejects that. It'll just be like, no. But one of the big aspects of working on the retreat is, well, how do I actually change my mindset? Well, it means changing the story. And that story change is what determines your results at the end. And that's what's so important about doing work around stories.
Right,
Now, what I'm doing isn't therapy. It, it's not
right,
that, but it's coaching and helping you do that. But a lot of therapists do similar work in a different way around stories.
right. And I was listening to a, TED Talk earlier this month about storytelling because it's been on my mind, and she shared the idea of a therapist being your editor to
Oh,
your story,
interesting.
or maybe a coach being the editor to your story so that
Mhm.
because she actually shared it was really cool, like, she's one of those columnists that gets like, "Dear therapist, here's my problems," right?
Yeah.
But she shared, like, the perspective of maybe a wife writing in with their marriage problems and then the husband writing in with the marriage problems, and how each story actually is true, and it's
Mhm.
actually, like, they're both having the same experience, but their point of view about the experience is so wildly different. Their story about the experience is so wildly different that you side with each one of them when she shares the story.
Yeah.
And so having that editor being the one to be like, hey, like an outside perspective, a coach, a therapist, whatever it is, but somebody being an outside editor to the story to make sure we're getting the best story possible moving
Mhm.
forward. I love
Yeah.
that idea and thought that that was, I don't know.
Yeah. Um, One of the things that is so interesting to me about story work is, well, then what do you do when someone else's story is different?
Ooh,
Like what you're describing. And I had a client in the lab. So the Joyosity Leadership Lab is a group of women leaders that I work with. And she had somebody who is on her team um, not have something ready that she had asked for. And she was definitely frustrated. Like it wasn't this is a no big deal situation. It was definitely like, okay, we have to rework some things now because that happens. I mean, that's real life things. But in trying to understand what happened, um, she was like, is it okay if we talk about this now? Or should we talk about this later? Because I really needed this. And so I want to talk about how it happened, but is now a good time? So which was so wise. And the person said, yes. Well, it turned out wasn't really a good time. And so now there's this big thing. And so later they kind of come back to it. And the team member's story was so vastly different than her story. It was shocking. It was shocking. And so we started talking through what could that be about for my client? And then how can she help get on the same page with her team member? Because the next step of the internal story or the experience that we have is the goal of communication, which is shared meaning. So how do we get to shared meaning when we have two different stories? And because that's the stuff that steals our joy at work. Like, oh, this isn't done. Like, I can't get through it. And we feel bad and all of those things. And so we started talking through the empathy of what this person has experienced. Go back through your own emails. How clear were you? Like just starting to gather the plot points, shall you? Like where could we find the overlap? And they eventually worked through it, but it was a long process
Right.
and is still kind of getting done in some
Right.
way. And it's when you're reconciling those things and trying to get to shared meaning, it's not just like, oh, here's the new story.
Yeah.
There's a little bit of work and practice, but at that point, the practice is the only way out is through.
Yeah.
Like making sure you understand the story, telling your own story, listening with curiosity to other people's stories, and then finding the overlapping plot points to move forward. It's not
Right.
fast.
No, I accidentally married somebody whose point of view is always so wildly different, and it's so interesting because a lot of times it's actually really helpful for both of us
Yeah.
to have that, like, wildly different perspective, and then other times we'll go through the exact same situation, the exact same experience, and we'll come out of it with completely different stories, like, completely different stories.
100%. Well, I tell the story in a keynote all the time about we took this vacation to Chicago. It's like my all-time favorite family vacation. We took the kids to Sears Tower, the art museum, Chicago style pizza, which is my absolute favorite, and like we just went everywhere. It was the best vacation. And a while back, about 4 or 5 years later, Hamilton was out and I was like, let's take Chase to go see Hamilton. And then we can you guys come up later because spring breaks were different because he was older and different school. And you guys come up later and we'll have spring break in Chicago and just have so much fun again. And Michael was like, why would we want to do that? I was like, what do you mean? He's like, that Chicago vacation was terrible. And he started telling me about like, don't you remember? I was so mad at Stuart. I wanted to like leave him in front of the lions at the art museum. And Sabrina complaining about walking the block to Giordano's Pizza. And I remember none of it.
Yeah,
Like
it's so
totally different
interesting.
experiences.
And it's been
Wow.
very helpful to have, like, that, like, idea that we, even at work, can be having the same experience, listening to the same podcast, producing the same thing, and come out with a completely different, like, "Oh, that part was so great," or, "This part was so great." And it's like, "Oh, that's interesting. That wasn't what, like, I will be remembering about the conversation, but
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah. And
Fun."
I was doing actually today a communications workshop inside of a leadership team that I'm doing leadership coaching with them in an organization. And we were talking about that. Like, what do you do when you like, rather than being like, that is not at all what happened, because
Yeah,
let me tell you, that's not helpful.
no.
And using words like, well, here's what I recall. Here's what I remember. Or, when you're pulling out the email receipts and you don't want to sound obnoxious, like, I know as much as per my last email is fun, you can also say it like, well, here's what I have. Do you have
Okay.
something different? Like things like
Yeah,
have, recall, remember aren't things that people can really argue with so much.
yeah.
And it helps kind of get everybody on the same page without stirring up more difficulty, I think.
Right. Well, especially when you're frustrated communicating, for me, I tend to actually, like, not wanna reply because I don't have the right words, when
Yes.
I'm frustrated, instead of like having those, like, I love that. Like, here's what I have. Like, do you have something different? For me, just sounds, I like, I can say that. What I can't
Yes.
say is like, per my last email, blah, blah, blah. Like, I struggle with that sometimes.
I can say per my last email. I should not always, but I can.
Yeah.
The difference between us.
I just love those little tips though of like
Yeah.
how you can say that. Like,
Yeah.
our stories aren't adding up. And
Yeah, our stories aren't the same, and there's something about saying it even just like that, that, like, I'm seeing a different story or I'm experiencing a different story that just acknowledges the different lived experiences of other people without denying your own,
yes.
and I think that's really powerful as a leader.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, any last thoughts of our month of joy at work and storytelling?
Storytelling. I just, for me personally, I just have started to share more of my stories, taking more time to actually explain things in story form.
Mhm.
And that's been really valuable for me this month of kind of recognizing that it's okay to share too when you're in the beginning or the middle of the story, but knowing that there's still more story to be had. And
Yeah.
then also sharing these stories of like different, like for example, on my live stream yesterday, I shared the story of how I came up with my business name, or like I'm sharing more of those stories thanks to this month with Kindra and with the things that you've written, where I'm recognizing the power of storytelling. And it's just been fun for me
Yeah.
because I love stories, but I've also kind of thought of it as like there's no space for stories in business. And that
Mhm.
myth was kind of busted this month, and I'm grateful for that because I think it will change things moving forward. So,
Yeah. Oh, I love that. That's really good. I think for me, I it definitely had things that didn't go according to plan this month.
yeah. I
Several.
don't know what it was about this month, but
I
that
know, several things that didn't go to I mean, being stuck in New York for 5 days when it was supposed to be 2 being one of them, and literally remembering oh, I literally heard Kinder's voice, one, because she lives in New York, and that's fun, of like, "Is she here telling me, 'Are you in the middle of a story?'" You know, as I'm walking out of the Museum of Broadway trying to figure out how we're gonna get a flight home, like, I'm in the middle of a story, and then
I mean,
immediately,
that
like
that came to me this month as well. Like
yeah,
that little tidbit of like, "Oh, this will be a good story later." Like, I
yeah,
had a really hard situation at work, and I was like, "You know what? Now I have a good hard situation story. I
yeah,
haven't had one of these before, and
yeah,
now I have it." Like,
yeah.
okay.
Yeah. I mean, it doesn't deny I would like to have learned it another way, but it
100.
also brings some calmness and that positivity to the difficulty. It doesn't deny the difficulty. It's not like Pollyanna, it's fine, which is my MO when I'm not being healthy.
Right.
But like, okay, there's a story here. I've I can get through this. I've done it before. I can do it again. And I'm in the middle, and the middle's super messy. And
And it's also
okay,
helpful, I feel like, because then you're like, "And I'm gonna write the ending well. Here's how I'm
yes,
gonna write the ending."
yes, yeah. I always like to say, write the story that creates the most freedom. Write the story that creates the most freedom, and that's how we get more joy in what we're doing. Because now I'm the one that has agency, and when we have agency, it's a different space of healthy control. It's not like managing and controlling everything, but using our agency and power in a different way. Um, yeah. All righty. All right. So last question. What is what's some joy for you coming up? What's
Joy. Ooh.
what's some joy
What
for
is
you
some
coming up?
joy for me coming up? I have been loving my garden. I'm sure you've seen on my social media, Jen, everybody else. And I am really looking forward to pumpkins that are coming through. And I'm excited about like carving pumpkins. And I can just, the joy of growing the garden has been fun, sharing it with my family. And then just I think I'm anticipating more joy from my garden would
I
be where.
love that.
What about you?
It's funny because now we haven't had one child at home since Stuart was born 20 some odd years ago. Like we've just that's not been our experience. And my husband travels a lot for work, so it's kind of just the two of us.
Yeah.
And it's been really fun. It feels awkward
Yep.
and also kind of fun. Like it's bringing some new things up and joy. And so we've decided to grow plants. So I
Wow.
have new plants that I'm naming. I haven't totally decided their names yet, but just like something that we can work on together. So that's funny, the gardening. But I think that like this new relationship has some different opportunities that I don't know if I was looking forward to. I don't think that's the right thing, but after just a few days, like we're just 3 or 4 days in, I'm like, this is going to be fun. It's going to be different. It's
Yeah.
going to be fun.
And because she's the youngest, like
Yeah.
this is like that's so cool.
Yeah.
That's so
It's
fun.
really fun. Well, make sure that you follow Shelby at Sunshine Lane, and she does live streams on LinkedIn once a month
Yes.
regularly.
Yeah,
And
and I'm actually gonna start amping those up. I'm excited.
oh, very exciting. Very exciting. And if you are interested in coming to the Joyosity Retreat, this is the link to my website. This is the link to find me in St. Louis. So that is jenwhitmer.com/joyosity-retreat. That is where you can find that. And early bird is ending soon. So make sure that you get in on that. And we will see you next week. Bye, everybody. So let me put my coach hat on for just a moment. Don't just leave this here. Take a moment. What did you learn? What's your next tiny action step? Share this episode with someone and tell them what you're going to do. Check the show notes for all the links and connect with us on LinkedIn and all the other socials, or just, drop me an email at jen with 2 N's at jenwhitmer.com. We want to keep this conversation going with you. I know your earballs have a lot coming at them, so thank you for listening to the Joyosity podcast and being a part of our community. Please take a moment to rate and subscribe. It helps more people join us in the movement to create positive culture with complex people. So work is a joy, people are whole, and organizations flourish. Can't wait for you to join us next week.